all of us to this event, and thank you for joining us as we are looking forward to having a very wonderful and fruitful interaction during the lecture. On this note, I'd like to hand over the platform to Dr. Sheya Ajayi to introduce the guest lecturer and help moderate the lecture. Thank you everyone once again, and hope we have a very impactful session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawani, and good morning, everyone. So like Dr. Lawani correctly said, I will be moderating this exercise. And I will start by introducing the speaker of today's lectures. So he is a former soldier, a former research and development chemist, a former banking executive, and an active academic, who is an associate professor of strategic management at Louis College of Business at Massachusetts University in West Virginia, here in the United States. Dr. Lawani obtained his Bachelor of Science from the University of Benin City in Nigeria, and he also obtained his Master's in Business Administration and Finance from East Carolina University, and a PhD in Strategy and Economics from the University of North Texas. His research interests in business and international development, corporate governance, firm and company performance, mergers and acquisition, and organizational theory. Dr. Lawani has published in numerous peer-reviewed journals, and is been involved in teaching exercises in many universities across the United States of America. So he is a seasoned academic, and he's going to be lecturing us today and providing us with some interesting perspectives on the connections between socioeconomic development and transitional justice. So I yield the floor to Dr. Lawani as he takes us through his scope of intellectual strength.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajayi. Can you, folks, can you hear me well? I just recently survived some kind of viral attack. It wasn't COVID. It's just strange. I picked one of these viruses, I think, that gave me, I didn't have any fever, but at some point I lost my voice actually for about a day. So it's gradually coming back now. This isn't my normal voice. I know I can almost hear myself croaking. So please bear with me. But you can hear me though.
I hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. All right, that's good. Yeah. Okay, so I want to greet everyone. If you're joining us from Nigeria or other parts of Africa, it would be appropriate to say good afternoon. And for those of you like me and Dr. Ajayi, who are on the west side of the Atlantic, it would be good morning. It's some minutes past 9 a.m. here on the east coast of the United States. So let me again thank Dr. Ajayi for the kind introduction. Anybody who heard that will think that we had coordinated or we had done some kind of rehearsal. The truth is, I'm meeting Dr. Ajayi for the first time myself, which is the beauty of academia, is that he has done this quite often enough to be able to carry it on in a seamless manner. So I thank you. I appreciate it greatly. My hope is that we'll have a vibrant conversation this morning. They say it's a lecture. I think it's more a conversation, because I'm by no means an expert on the subject. Indeed, like Dr. Ajayi said, my original field of study is in strategy, strategic management, and in economics. For my master's degree, I studied finance, and for my undergraduate, I have a degree in microbiology. But we know that this is what us scholars do, is that we do not shy away from straying into unfamiliar paths or unfamiliar territories. As a matter of fact, because we are desperate to discover new things, will take it on. So yes, I do research in the field of developmental economics, and I have no apologies. I'm an unapologetic individual when it comes to African or issues that relate to the global South. So yes, I'm unapologetic when it comes to anything that has to do, whether academically or practically, with the continent of Africa. But let me caution at this point that when you find, not if you find, when you find the flaws and gaps in my thoughts as we carry on this morning, you have my permission to put every blame squarely on Dr. Philip Olayoku. You have my absolute permission to blame him fully. If you find, not if, when you find those flaws, because he set me up for this, as he said in the introduction. We have been friends for years, and so he set me up for this by not only by inviting me to deliver the talk this morning, but by pulling me gradually, whether he knew it or not, into this field. And so I'm not sure if he planned it from years ago, but I know that he has been consistent in being my partner on many projects. He's invited me to be a member of the board of the West African Transitional Justice Center, as he said. And from our several conversations in the past several years, we have reason to collaborate. And in all of this, what has happened is that all of these factors have kind of combined, conspired to pull me gradually into the field of seeing the connection or looking at the nexus or the meeting point between issues that border on justice in any form or injustice, transitional justice, social justice, or injustice, and the issues of economic or socioeconomic development. So, Dr. Phil, I'm grateful. I'm appreciative of your friendship. I thank you for your support for my work, and in particular for your confidence in considering me worthy to share my thoughts through the platform of the WATJC this morning. So we all know that the conversations and the debates, let me share my screen and put up a PowerPoint. The slides are not too many, but I've tried to capture the main highlights of my conversation on this slide, so that way, if I have to refer back, I'll have a reference point. So let me share my screen and put up the slide. Okay. Okay. So again, the topic of our conversation this morning is socioeconomic advancement and transitional justice in Africa, decolonization and integration as Fons et Origo. Fons et Origo being a Latin phrase or a Latin maxim, really meaning the foundation, the fountain, or the source, or the origin. So in other words, my recommendation is for decolonization and integration as the origin, or I use the word origin loosely, not in a strict form, but as the fountain or as a starting point for deeper conversations or deeper work in advancing the socioeconomic fortunes of Africa, especially within the milieu or the context of transitional justice. So we all know that the conversations and the debates on transitional justice in Africa especially have kind of focused on the subject of transitional justice as a beacon of hope, as something that we can look up to, as a palliative, as a route, or as a process for getting a palliative to those who have been traumatized. And so to this extent, anybody who's involved in the field, whether a scholar, whether someone employed in non-governmental space, or someone in some form of advocacy, they've combined to do work, or they continue to do so, to place transitional justice, therefore, in Africa as a vehicle to see that we develop a more egalitarian society and a more democratic or a more inclusive space on the African continent. And that's good, that's noble. But inherent in that is the gap that we see from the developmental side, or from the lens or the view of socioeconomics within the African context. And the truth is, this conversation is not the first conversation around this topic. If you look in the literature, you find there's a sizable amount of work that has been done trying to draw this connection. What hasn't happened is we haven't really localized it to the African context. Understanding the role of colonialism and understanding the role of the comparative disadvantages we have as a continent within that context, so that we can see Africa for what it is when we're having a conversation of socioeconomic development or advancement and transitional justice. So my job this morning or afternoon is to draw attention to this connection between these two, and then to make suggestions or recommendations for what we can do as scholars, as practitioners, as people who are advocates, who can't wait to see a developed continent, who can't wait to see a continent flourishing with more opportunities for our burgeoning youth. So that's my job. I want us to agree that there is a need for socioeconomic development within the transitional justice milieu, and to recognize that while the denial of economic benefits to individuals on the fringes of many African societies may not be justiciable, as it is to say, well, you have violated my human right, or I'm going to court because you have impeached my fundamental rights, or you are impacting on my liberty, I can go to court. We haven't placed the economic fortunes or the connections between the individual and the economic fortunes. We haven't found strands within that space that are justiciable. I mean, I know one or two, a few countries around the world actually make it justiciable, the access to education or to healthcare or to some social benefits or welfare benefits, justiciable. So in an indirect manner, yes, you can connect that to economic fortunes. But in the real sense, it's very hard to find justiciable portions in the society when it comes to economic issues of, profit, or as the American, the Declaration of Rights in the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, and bestowed by certain inalienable rights, among which is the right to life, right to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the pursuit of happiness is essentially a socioeconomic pursuit. And so that strand is often missing in the justiciable space. But the irony of it is that while this is the case, while I can't go to court to enforce my right to say, well, why can't I make profit like Elon Musk is making profit? Or why can't I make profit like someone who's not making quite as much as Elon Musk is making, given that I think I have equal talent? Why don't I have access to the same, what I call it, I don't want to say not education in this sense, but why don't I have the same privileges, let's put it that way, that these folks had, that lent them, or that they were able to leverage to make so much more economic fortunes than I have? It's not easily justiciable, because the courts will locate that as being a frivolous case or a frivolous venture. So, okay, that being the case, but we know that the collateral for these disadvantages or these imbalances in society are felt in stark economic terms. And so people who are denied economic access become burdens to society, directly or indirectly. Society also, the economy also becomes worse off. I mean, in economic terms, we say there's deadweight loss when you create imbalances that favor one segment or section of the society relative to another. And so we see that it plays out. It plays out. You can see that government, where the society is pulling from various seams to be able to make up for those we call delinquents, because we have prevented them from having access to economic fortunes, or to giving them making the ladder available for them to grow on the socioeconomic platform. So we see that. And so that's what has moved me to make this argument, that even though we can locate socioeconomic development not only as a panacea when it comes to providing for folks who are on the fringes of the society, but there are actually examples in our world today, especially in Africa, where socioeconomic development should be enforced, should be justiciable, and should be reparation. Because we can see the effect of deliberate acts that have cut people off from access in society, and that by no reason or by no fault of theirs, they couldn't make advancements socioeconomically. So, but then I also recognize that we'll say, well, the continent is poor. In aggregate terms, yes, we have some people who are wealthy, who are just as wealthy as folks anywhere else in the world. We can identify socioeconomic advancements in certain areas, especially in the large urban areas in our continent. But comparatively, we are poor. I mean, our gross domestic product, if that is a yardstick for measuring wealth and growth, is way behind. We are far, far behind. We're not just last among the continents of the world. The gap between the continent ahead of us and us is huge when you compare it to all the other continents on the globe. So we recognize that we're comparatively poor. And that's why I'm suggesting that those who have called for the uniqueness in our approach to growth and to development are correct. And we should welcome it. Because the continent, we have tried all the models prescribed by multilateral organizations. We have done our best to benchmark and to compare with the developed world. And we have seen now, with the benefit of access to information and knowledge, that what we've been sold was the wrong end of the stick. All of these years, those development plans and policies formulated on our behalf by people who are not in our reality, those plans have not worked for us. That's the truth. So yes, there's a place for asking for the uniqueness in approach, in developing, in generating ideas, and in finding ways to implement those ideas and policies in the African context. But what I'm saying is missing this morning is that even as we approach that in a unique way, as in an African way, even as we look at the problems we have on the continent and the solutions we want to proffer and how to implement them from the African context, we cannot run away from looking at the issues of colonization, and in particular, taking steps to decolonize. And the connection to that decolonization process is the issue of integration. In other words, colonialism, you must agree in net analysis that it did much more to separate us than it did to bring us together. And if we are to decolonize, then we must also look at the side of integration. And I'm not the first person talking about this. Matter of fact, if you've gone to listen to Professor P.L. Lumumba speak, you would have heard him say a lot whenever he addresses issues. He speaks specifically to countries, but when he does that, he finds ways to situate the context of that country he's addressing or the audience he's speaking to the larger issue of the African continent. Not in the way of being romantic about Pan-Africanism, but in the way of identifying that our ultimate destinies, our destinies as individuals or as separate countries, are connected to our destiny as a collective continent. So that's my recommendation, that in finding these unique ways and these unique approaches to socioeconomic development, we must address the issue of colonization, of decolonization. So you can separate the DE from decolonization as well. Decolonization and decolonization and integration as being relevant to that process. And all of this within the context of transitional justice. So let me continue by sharing this anecdote. Between November 2001 and November 2004, so we're talking here about 22, 23 years ago, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs undertook a project for the purpose of promoting international cooperation for social development and supporting developing countries and social groups that they felt were not benefiting from the globalization process. They called that project Open Societies, Open Economies, Challenges and Opportunities. Some of you may have seen that. Now, the project was financed through extra budgetary contributions, so it was not channeled through the regular budgeting process in the UN, which means it was separated somehow. It was kind of isolated, or there was some kind of barrier between it and the regular mainstream United Nations operation, so that it won't be tainted or it won't be influenced by the powerful members or the movers and shakers within the United Nations. So it had that kind of protection. It was extra budgetarily financed. But it was carried out within the framework of the implementation of the outcome of the World Summit for Social Development that had held about 6 years previously in Copenhagen, Denmark. Now, there were 4 meetings of the forum that were held in the headquarters in New York. The first one was what they call the Financing Global Social Development Forum. That one held in February of 2002 on the 7th and on the 8th. The second one was what they call the Cooperation for Social Development, the international dimension to that, which also held in the same year, in October of that year, on the 16th and on the 17th. The third one, they called the International Migrants and Development. That one held in 2003, a year after the second one, was on the 7th and on the 8th of October in 2003. And the fourth one held in 2004, and about 9 months after I actually arrived in this country, about 10 months, 11 months after I arrived. We call that Equity, Inequalities and Interdependence. It held on the 5th and the 6th of October of 2004. Now, I consider these 4 meetings very important. Matter of fact, I consider this project very important in the discussion of socioeconomic development, especially with transitional justice. The United Nations didn't quite capture it within the framework of international justice. They looked at it more within the framework of justice or injustice, generally speaking. But if you are involved in the scholarship or in the debate on transitional justice, you'll be pulled into this conversation that happened in the United Nations. So these meetings brought together invitees from different regions and different walks of life. And the seminars were open, the debates were informal, there were representatives from all the states in the UN and from non-governmental organizations as well. So the findings from each one of these forums and the report that was finally put together was presented orally at the annual sessions for the Commission for Social Development. And I'm going to summarize what the findings were for the sake of time, and because I want to be as specific as I possibly can, given the aim of this conversation this morning or this afternoon. So here's the major takeaway, and I'm using the words of the author, so I'm quoting verbatim from the United Nations report, if you will permit me. So here's what they said. The rise in inequality, at this point I should go on. This is where I am now, my presentation. The rise in inequality in the distribution of income among people is well documented and displays the characteristics of a trend having affected large numbers of countries, from the poorest to the most affluent, during the past 2 decades. So in this case, they were talking about the decade between the mid-80s up to that point. Now, this is germane even as we speak today, because almost nothing has changed. So up to the 1980s, they say, at least since the Second World War, and in some cases, since the beginning of the 20th century, there had been a general narrowing of differences in the income available to individuals and families. Now, the conversation on transitional justice itself, as a body of work, as a subject area, probably started around the same time, post-Second World War, collapse of the Soviet Union and all the issues from the fragmentation or the breakdown after the Yugoslavia war. So you can almost draw a parallel, not a correlation in this case, but we're having transitional justice conversations after the Second World War, with all the evil perpetrated by the Axis and the Axis power, and then the coming out of which now moves all the way to the Cold War era, then the post-Cold War era. So this kind of parallels that time. So income-related inequalities, notably in the ownership of capital and other assets, in access to a variety of services and benefits, and in the personal security that money can buy, are growing. There are also greater inequality in the distribution of opportunities for remunerated employment, with worsening unemployment and underemployment in various parts of the world, affecting a disproportionate number of people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. The inequality gap between the richest and poorest countries, measured in terms of national per capita income, is growing as well. The popular contention that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer appears to be largely based on fact, particularly within the present global context. Moreover, extreme or absolute poverty experienced by those whose income is barely sufficient for survival remains widespread. Indigence levels have risen in the most affluent countries, in countries once part of the Soviet bloc, and in various parts of Africa, but have remained stable in Latin America and have declined in Asia, which is still the case as we speak. Extreme poverty and the suffering it entails affect a large proportion of humankind, and major efforts by governments and international organizations to reduce or eradicate poverty have thus far failed to produce the desired result. Then they ask this question: do these facts and trends suggest a regression in social justice? The answer to this question, if considered within the framework of the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is not unequivocal. The persistence, aggravation, and very existence of extreme poverty constitute an injustice. Those experiencing dire poverty are deprived of a number of the fundamental rights invoked in the Charter and enumerated in the Universal Declaration. Individuals affected by internal conflicts and wars are also robbed of many of their basic freedoms and are thus victims of injustice as well. Hunger is but one face of poverty. Discrimination, poor health, vulnerability, insecurity, and the lack of personal and professional development opportunities are among the many other challenges faced by the poor. The rise in poverty in all its manifestations, along with the increase in the numbers of refugees, displaced persons, and other victims of circumstance and abuse, represent sufficient evidence for a judgment of persistent, if not growing, injustice in the world. So yes, there is a nexus and a connection between transitional justice and socioeconomic development. So some proponents of social justice, though sufficiently fewer since the collapse of state communism, dream of total income equality. Most, however, hold the view that when people engage in economic activity for survival, personal and professional growth, and the collective welfare of society, inequality is inevitable but should remain within acceptable limits that may vary according to the particular circumstances. In the modern context, those concerned with social justice see the general increase in income inequality as unjust, deplorable, and alarming. It is argued that poverty reduction and overall improvements in the standard of living are attainable goals that will bring the world closer to social justice. However, there is little indication of any real ongoing commitment to address existing inequalities. In today's world, the enormous gap in the distribution of wealth, income, and public benefits is growing ever wider, reflecting a general trend that is morally unfair, politically unwise, and economically unsound. Injustices at the international level have produced a parallel increase in inequality between affluent and poorer countries. That is the situation, and that is how it is as we speak. The truth of the matter is, when there is socioeconomic, there is a lack of socioeconomic growth and movement in societies, individuals in such societies get pushed to the fringes and the margins, and those who are better off consume the main space. And what ends up happening is that the cycle never ends. Rich get richer, poor gets poorer, feeds into injustice. Presence of injustice feeds back into it, right? Because those who have create structures and governance structures to protect themselves. Those who don't have are constantly clawing, wanting access, for asking for help, asking for justice. And maybe if they get some kind of palliative, if they get justice in the true sense, they can get themselves into the mainstream and begin their own climb around the rungs of the ladder of socioeconomic mobility. So, future of transitional justice, especially within this context. So Makao Mutua, whenever the editorial was written for volume 9 of the International Journal of Transitional Justice, the 2015 version, volume 9, Makao Mutua wrote the editorial for it. And in that editorial, the journal kind of provides, first of all, the question of the future of transitional justice. What's the relevance for us going into the future? Is the relevance just in the debate and the conversations we have? Or is the relevance in that we are actually going to be able to make society better? Now let's localize this to the African context. As we speak, we have had conversations that border on transitional justice after the Truth and Reconciliation Forum or panel in South Africa. We've had an international court after the genocide in Rwanda. We've had a Truth and Reconciliation conversation in Nigeria. After the elections in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, the election that brought Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto to power in Kenya, the International Court was set up supposedly to address the issues of the crisis and the mayhem that heralded or that was fueled by the disagreements between Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta after that election. We have had conversations in Tunisia arising from the beginning of more or less the offspring of the Arab Spring. But what's the future? Was that all of that a process without an end, or was that an end in itself? And so that issue in the 2015 edition, they addressed it. And so everybody agrees that no, it has to lead us somewhere. We have to be able to say that because we embarked on this journey, we arrived at such a destination. And so they propose a two-step process of change. First of all, let me just paraphrase what Mutua said in that editorial. So the term transitional justice evokes hope and renaissance. And so when the concept of transitional justice was first mooted sometime, many decades ago, post-conflict and other tormented societies have attempted to embrace it as a bridge to a more hopeful future. So Mutua was quoting. Now, a number of states in the depths of despair and countries racked by seemingly endless cycles of violence therefore see transitional justice tools as a possible midwife of a democratic rule of law state. In many circles, transitional justice has become an article of faith as a catalyst for reclaiming societies in political and social imbalance and dysfunction. Senior statesmen and leading academics have endorsed the critical place of transitional justice in returning societies to civilization. As we speak, in Nigeria, there's unending issues around insecurity. Folks cannot access their farms, they cannot access the streams or rivers to fish. Some of them cannot even access neighboring countries to visit, carry out normal businesses because of the activities of bandits and marauders who wouldn't let them. The conversation about transitional justice should have a place in the larger discussion surrounding such an issue. Issues of insecurity, issues of people being cut off from access to their normal life. They should be able to, the society should be able to organize in a way that when we're resolving those issues, there's a place for transitional justice and its connection to the socioeconomic benefits of the socioeconomic situation of those people, hopefully after the fact of whatever issues or crisis or dysfunction that they have just come out of. So yes, we know that there have been successes historically. Not all of those things were bad examples. There have been examples where transitional justice actually led. Actually, you can even argue that there was some kind of soft landing in the end, whether it was because of the inadequacies of the international court or not. But there was some kind of soft landing in the case of Kenya. We can say that, right? And there's arguments about the others. And then there's the issue of how South Africa also found ways using the notion of Ubuntu to resolve their own problems. Right. So, but we see a mixed bag, lopsided more in the failure of a, how would I put it? Lopsided more in the shortcomings of transitional justice when it comes to redeeming issues surrounding the socio-economic development of people or of our societies. So they recommend this two-step process of change. And so in the first one, what they're seeking to do is to stabilize in the societies that have been afflicted now. So many examples in Africa. I mean, almost all the countries. I can go from Dakar all the way to Dar es Salaam, and you find examples, pockets of conflicts, pockets. Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Ghana, Burkina, Nigeria, all the way. Congo, you can name it, Central African Republic, from Cairo, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, and from Cairo to Cape Town. The story is almost the same in Africa. And so I find that this two-step process of change is relevant to our conversations as we draw the thread or do the connection to the socioeconomic development of the continent. So the first step seeks to stabilize a post-conflict society through temporary measures that signal a commitment to addressing the abuses of the past. So we'll take steps, we'll make statements, we'll set up these panels, these platforms, these forums to have this conversation. The second component concerns the ethics and the appearance of the process and the outcome. The point is that in order for us to move forward as an inclusive and fair society, we cannot leave any major party behind. So there's no gainsaying the fact. We can't say that, well, folks are not ready to come along. You know, there's a tribe from Nigeria that just wouldn't cooperate with the remaining tribes. We have to leave them behind. When you leave them behind, the conflict isn't resolved. Your socioeconomic, the socioeconomic fortune or destiny of the other tribes is connected to that one you're living. In other words, the society is as strong as its weakest link. For us to have socioeconomic advancement in the African context, within the African continent, we must recognize the place of every aspect of the continent, no matter how little, how minute, or how inconsequential that tribe or that group of people may be. So the problems in Ethiopia, you have to recognize there's no majority or minority. The minority may actually be major to the extent that if you don't resolve the conflict, if you don't bring them into the mainstream, the ones are not really better off. And so then, but we see that there have been deficits in the conversation of the Human Rights Project, generally speaking, transitional justice specifically, you know, and how all of that connects to what we're talking about today. So there are three deficits really, but for the sake of time, let me just summarize and then I'll go. The second and the third one are the ones that really concern us. So the first one is that they say that the human rights corpus and its movement are not really universal, so that the rights language, the reason we have problems with the conversation in Africa is that we've been holding on to prescriptions from, let me just say it, from Europe-dominated conversations. And we bring in experts in transitional justice or in human rights sphere or in socioeconomic from Europe. And these are the people who form the main large think tanks that even kind of percolate and fill the space in all of Africa. And yes, there are voices that come from the North American continent, but predominantly we have relied on experts from Europe. But the main their conversation has been, it's of a Western construct. We have to really study it, find a way to remove the Eurocentric hue that it has, and then we can begin to make adaptations to our own case or to Africa. The second problem, and which this is the one that concerns the socioeconomic space, this is where we locate transitional socioeconomic development in the transitional justice milieu, is that the conversations have addressed a different kind of inclusivity and universality. When people talk about human rights, they focus it only within civil and political rights at the expense of economic, social, and cultural rights. Matter of fact, but for the boldness of people like Philip Olayoku, generating a transitional justice lecture or debate around socioeconomic development is almost harakiri. It's almost like, no. We're talking here only about civil rights. No, civil rights, human rights, social rights, economic rights should not be disaggregated. Matter of fact, the evidence of someone's freedom to be who they are, exercise of their human rights, must be located in their continued pursuit of happiness, which is an economic variable. That's the second one. The third one, which is also connected to socioeconomic issues, is that the human rights conversation always focuses on the individual. Well, we're talking here about what abuse, how did this family, and that's why you see, when you set up all the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, you set up the issues, when they come to this place, it's all about individual abuse. Oh, my family's farm got destroyed. My dad got killed. My wife. Yes, these are problems. These are issues that the transitional justice platforms should talk about. But in the larger context, the human rights conversation, transitional justice conversation must recognize the collective, that it's a shared destiny. It's a shared destiny. What's the place of the society? What's the place of the collective? And so now we come, so transitional justice and socioeconomic wrong. So this is where this now dovetails. And there are multiple of examples from the global south. I've cited the ones from the African continent. You can talk about the ones that, the issues that they had to deal with in Chile after the ousting of the Pinochet government. You can talk about the ones they had to deal with in Argentina after multiple repressive military regimes. You can talk about the one they had to deal with in Brazil, and we can go on and on. Talk about the one in Asia, Burma, Vietnam, multiple examples. But let's make this relevant to Africa. Folks, we have problems on the continent. Transitional justice is relevant. The conversations are relevant to the times, but we must locate it in the socioeconomic context. Our people have been, the relevance to Africa must recognize the role of our colonizers, that someone actually organized the conference, or people actually organized the conference in Berlin, chaired by an imperialist, and they had consideration on resolving their own conflicts about who owns what on the African continent. And since that time, folks, this is not saying that pre-colonization we didn't have problems. We had intracontinent, and intertribal or interregional conflicts in Africa. But those conflicts made it easy for us to be colonized, by the way. But the colonizers exacerbated those problems. They deepened the division. They impoverished us much more. So we cannot isolate transitional justice in Africa, especially in connection with our socioeconomic well-being. We cannot isolate it from the experience of our colonization. And that's where it is relevant to Africa. And so here's what I suggest, that for us to avoid the past wrongs, for the sake of time, I want us to go into the questions and then have a larger conversation. I recommend that we avoid past wrongs. In other words, it's time to highlight the problems, the mistakes from the past. But we're not highlighting them because we want to avoid them. We want to isolate what the mistakes were, signpost them and say, hey, that's a pitfall. You don't go back here. Or like the Chinese said, after they were invaded and colonized by the Japanese in the Second World War, and Chairman Mao came out of that and declared in 1948 or 46, never again. This is not going to happen again. China has been on the path of socioeconomic advancement and cultural advancement since that time, to the point where today Japan is constantly looking behind them. From being colonizers, Japan is now also consciously afraid, morbidly afraid of being colonized by China. So we should avoid past wrongs. Our focus here is on the future. What can we do here on out, hereafter, to ensure that we use the place of transitional justice, the need for us to right the wrongs of the past, correct imbalances and injustices, create platforms and vehicles for our people to make socioeconomic advancement. So I say that we have to decolonize. Decolonization is not just the issue it's not the issue of the colonizers have left the continent. No, the colonizers have left because we have self-government. The colonizers have not left because we have invited them back. We see them every day. We idolize them every day. We worship them every day. Matter of fact, we worship their gods. we emulate their schools. We patronize their everything. Our security apparatus is financed by them. And we'll have those larger issues when we start the conversation. And then integration, like I said, we have to bring the continent together. I'm not saying we are going to erase boundaries. We may need to redraw boundaries. But folks, trust me, you are as rich as the poorest person in your neighborhood. And we can see that. I mean, I live in the US. The president had to go to the southern border to Mexico because of the crisis, the invasion, the constant, never-ending pressure to migrate into the United States from the countries south of us who are not quite as economically bestowed or better or well off as we are. And the US is only able to manage that because there's a vibrant economy and there's a constant need for us to grow. Now, they have their own issues. I'm not using them as a standard. I'm just saying that imagine that you isolate countries. I mean, you can even see what happens in South Africa. The issues of xenophobia because of the influx of people from Zimbabwe and other parts around the country coming in, supposedly, because they think the grass is greener on that side. So we have to integrate, or we can just go mad. We can mutually assure our own destruction. So here are my concluding thoughts as I round up. Yes, there is injustice. And yes, it's connected to the socioeconomic situation on the continent. The socioeconomic situation feeds back into the injustice. It does, because those who are advantaged erect structures and create barriers to protect themselves, which invariably makes those who are not better off, pushes them further to the fringe. So you put schools, good schools in the localities where the better off people stay. You don't put schools if you put bad schools if you put at all. So you continue to fuel the injustice among the marginalized. So it never ends. So there has to be a thrust to break that inertia, to break that loop. And that's what this conversation is about. And I say that it's time for us to act and not to play to the gallery. At this point, I'll shut my mouth, go on mute, and let the questions and comments come in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawani, and it's been an interesting exercise and a very enlightening exercise, which I believe everyone has gained a whole lot from. So without boring us with repeating what he has said, I will ask anyone who has questions to raise up their hands. And that's going to start with George Nakanda, who has raised up his hand to ask his questions at this time.
Hello, Shay. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I believe I can hear you. Can everyone hear his voice now?
Yes, you can hear him.
Okay.
Okay. Right, please.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Amazing discussion from Dr. Lawani. Uyo Lawani, sorry, I don't know how to address you. I've been on and off, network and all that. And it's been amazing, everything you spoke about so much. You spoke about a lot of things on access to transaction, access to areas, and being that stories across Africa seem same based on Africa being or rather, many parts of Africa being an extractive economy, being run as an extractive economy, not an inclusive economy. And the colonization of a lot of parts of the colonization in lots of things that we do. And let me tell you a little story, and I hope you don't mind this. Years ago, I used to intern at a radio station, and I was given about an hour to talk. That was my first experience in radio, and that was somewhere in Benin City, Independent Radio Benin. And I remember that everybody wanted, now basically in school, on campus, I spoke Pidgin English with everybody, and I really wanted to do a radio show that had a lot to do with Pidgin English. That's something that my schoolmates could relate to. Unfortunately, I was told this station was a British-styled radio station. I felt really upset because I just had to speak English and I'd go back to campus and speak Pidgin with my friends and all that. A few months later, I came to Lagos and I listened to a radio station being run in Pidgin English. All of you know of Wazobia FM, owned by Cool FM, and a foreigner brought it to Nigeria before other people began to do a lot of what I read Pidgin English radio stations. I'm talking about 2006, 2007, And when you speak of decolonizing, it's almost like the Chinese man understands that when he comes to China, he looks at a woman selling corn. He's not thinking of buying corn for 15 naira and you're roasting it for 100 and selling it for 100 naira. He's thinking of how to take a lot of containers of corn and going out to make golden one and bringing steel that we buy at exorbitant amounts, And it's almost like foreigners understand how to come here and change a lot of things, and we follow suit and we get excited, And now talking of decolonizing, we are doing a lot of things around archiving art, doing documentary, because sometimes when we get angry, my team and I, we make videos and stuff like that. So what we just do, we look for an annoying thing and make a documentary around it, And we try to do it in our own way. Now we're thinking of doing something on all the archivings that have been ignored. We've met lots of people. We're making it like a couple of series and stuff. And there are so many disheartening stories that we've done. There's a part that has to do with videos, a part that has to do with pictures, a part that has to do with art, And you listen to what people who have tried to archive these things have gone through. I could call names here. It's not. It's still in process. But you find out that when we're talking of, okay, how can we push to make a digital museum in Nigeria and stuff like that? And then we now say this conversation around ourselves that, it's foreigners who are going to sponsor this thing. Nobody in Nigeria is going to consider sponsoring this thing. Foreigners will sponsor this thing and still own 9% of these museums, And when you come to talk about the aspect of decolonization, I'm sorry, we don't even know. Where do we start? There's almost no access for everybody. Even as a Nigerian, you know how hard it is going around Africa alone. You know how hard it is getting access to certain things you want in Nigeria with a Nigerian passport, being a Nigerian citizen, born and have lived in Nigeria for years. As an entrepreneur, it's just a glass wall. It's a bulletproof glass wall. To walk through it is almost impossible. You have to go slamming your head through it, and it may not break you, maybe, and you don't know. So I don't know. I appreciate this. Shout out to Dr. Philip. I had to be on this. I always set my alarm for this, and shout out to Lawani and a lot of you all out there. But I wish there were really answers to most of these questions. I wish there were answers to these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you have a response for
you? Dr. Shei, I didn't quite hear you. I know I saw you saying something.
Oh, okay. I thought I unmuted. So I can't just. So I was asking if you have a question, if you have a response for George.
Yeah,
So,
we can't hear you clearly, Dr. Ajayi, but I also think that there's a question on the chat. Maybe if you can take both, then you can respond to it. There's a question on the chat down here. But we
Okay.
can't hear you. Okay,
Okay.
we can hear you now.
Can you hear me
Yeah.
now? So I'm surprised. Okay, that's fine.
yes.
So there's a question here also. So, and I will read that out because we could have people who don't have access to their computer now. So we have, so this is from Ebenezer Adeyemi, and here it says, great presentation, Dr. Lawani. You talked about the growing inequality within and amongst countries as one of the main roadblocks to the achievement of transitional justice. So here is questions. Do you have any recommendations regarding how social economic inequality across contexts could be reduced or eradicated? That's number one. Number two, in addition to the ever-growing literature on decolonization, do you have any recommendations on practical steps that African nations can take to hasten the decolonization process and address some of the past wrongs, including injustice and socioeconomic inequality, that were carried to the contemporary post-colonial period? So those questions are in the chat, Dr.
Okay.
Lawani.
All right. Thank you. First, let me thank George Nakanda, I think, for the comments you made and the observations. They are correct. I mean, you lived the experience, so it's not, and it goes back to the larger issue of origin, of foundation. And that's why I think Philip was kind enough to accept my proposal for this lecture, that you can't, when you start building a home, what you see as the superstructure is the culmination of solid work done in the foundation. So we have to go back and address these issues from their foundation, from their roots, if we're to see a superstructure that we all desire or that would be desirable. So yes, it is a problem that we don't have funding, or that we even have to require funding, but all of that is a part of what we'll talk about. And I'm sure I'll capture it when I address the questions that Ebenezer has asked here. Now, regarding the reduction or the eradication of socioeconomic inequality. So let me say, first of all, that we are not recommending a utopian state or a utopian society. We are not saying that we'll not always have, let me not use inequality. We'll not always have, we're always going to be equally endowed or equally bestowed. In other words, some people do not desire beyond a particular amount of wealth. Some people desire to have so much wealth that they can hire thousands of millions of people. To everybody, what they can do with their talent. The problem is there are actually structures and institutions in our societies that mitigate the average person's chances. And those are the things we have to eradicate. And so when you have a society or governments or legislatures actually enacting laws and implementing policies, whether they are blindsided or they are being forced to enact them by multilateral organizations from New York or from Zurich or from London, those things become barriers to progress. And so I'll give you an example. Somewhere around, and I have a paper out there, I put this paper out in a journal, I can't remember which, talking about the role of the citizen in wealth creation. It's somewhere. If you put my name in Google and search enough, maybe you'll find it. But the point is that we always had ingenuity on the African continent. Let nobody tell you otherwise. The first university on record was in the Mali Empire, was Mali or Morocco, one or the other. And then we've had, if you go to Mali, Senegal, Gambia, so speak, there's a generation of griot that they've gone past 17th generation, and they've passed it on and on and on. I'm not kidding. There were traditions for education on the African continent. If Zimbabwe, the same. They had a tradition for equipping youth when it gets to your turn to organize, to be a farmer, a fisherman, a warrior. They had in the Oyo Empire, Benin Empire, among the Nupes, among the Igbos. We had these traditions. We're not devoid of ideas and ingenuity. It's not true. We had conflicts on the continent that made it easy for us to be colonized, because the folks who came from Europe couldn't stay on their own continent and they couldn't thrive. I live here. Here, there are things you can't do in the winter months. You just can't. You can't farm. You can't build. Spring comes, you start farming. But in Africa, you could do everything from first day of the. In fact, we had our seasons were seamless. In the time of dryness in one part of the country, you can go to another part, it's wet. In the time of wetness in one part, you can go to another part, it's dry. It's what we had on the African continent. And so they came, saw that we were contending people, we didn't quite have the tools they had, and so they exploited it, divided us and conquered, and then we've not been able to unshackle ourselves. So yes, for us to reduce or eradicate inequalities, we have to identify that there are structures and institutions mitigating them. And those structures and institutions are unique to different parts of the continent. So we can speak to Nigeria, where I've been. I can speak to South Africa, where I've done some work. I can speak to Ghana, where I've done some work, to Rwanda and Burundi, where I've also done some work. Ethiopia, I can give you examples of institutions and structures within those societies that actually mitigate the average person's mobility. You see it, right? Whether it's creating a patronage in the government system where only certain people can contest for positions, for political offices, whether it's access to contracts to develop your neighborhood, whether it's who can bring their products from the farms to specific trade boards or commodity boards. I'm not kidding. These structures actually exist by law in multiple countries, where you say, well, how does the ordinary person then access this? And then, so now it brings us back to the part where I said, I know that the continent is comparatively poor. So on the issue of access to education and healthcare, where government actually should intercede or intervene, government to tell you, well, we don't have the resources to resolve all the problems. That's where the uniqueness of the solution comes. You don't have to build the same school in Lagos as you build in Adamawa. You don't have to build the same hospital in Akure as you build in Funtua. You don't have to build the same police station or the same policing system in Abeokuta as you would have them have in Abakaliki. No, this is part of the decolonization, right? Even within the space, there's decolonization, where you say, no, I came from the city, I have this idea, and everybody's worshiping you because they're in the village. So anything you prescribe for them is what they take. It is also a colonization mindset. So to reduce it, we have to decolonize. We have to find ways to unshackle our minds and find local solutions to local problems. So like George said, we don't have to wait for the foreign investor to do it. We don't. We have to relax the laws that are requiring this kind of investment or this kind of deposits or this. You have to relax the laws to that thing. And if you don't have the technology, you don't have to, it's not like your eyes like a deer caught in the glare of someone's headlights and you don't know what to do. Say, oh, US has this technology, I must have it. We don't. That's part of the colonization we'll talk about. So then the second part of the question with regard to literature, here's where I'll tell you is the start point before I even recommend any other thing for you to look at. I beg you, if you're really interested in unshackling your mind as an African, just go back, just Google the agreement, the body of work, the different speeches and the lectures given at the inauguration of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. I kid you not. Everything I've said here, Kwame Nkrumah said in 1963. Everything I've said here, Ahmed Sekou said in 1959. I'm not kidding. It's not new. Everything we've said here, Haile Selassie said. It was a contention. Some people felt the continent should stay separate. Some said, no, we should actually be one country. And they finally resolved to be multiple countries because some countries were still under colonization. And they said, with due time, when we all get our freedom, let's come back and talk. Because united we stand. And you don't need to look far. Just look north of the continent to Europe, and you see that they couldn't manage their diversity, so they split into multiple countries. But for them to grow economically, they had to integrate. And so first it was the European Economic Commission all the way down to the European Union. Now they use one single currency, and they know that they only have comparative strength and advantage by doing that. So to eradicate, we must decolonize and find ways to integrate. And that surely then becomes a platform for us to grow, to grow, to pull everybody along with us. There is no small minority. There is no ignoring the Igalas because they are too small. There is no ignoring the Ijos in Ondo because they are a minority. There's no ignoring the Idoma in Benue because no, you are as strong as those minorities. You are strong as them. So don't say, I'm from Isaleko. Who is this one? We don't even know where you are from. You grew up in Shita. No, don't do that, because that's the colonial mindset. They always want you to see that you are better than the other person who is on the fringe. Okay, so if we do that, I think we can begin to address these injustices and these inequalities. But it's not just it's not theory. You can locate all of this in liberal theory, in the theory that is the groundswell or the ground norm for human rights, generally speaking, but it's also practical. Societies, go and check. If you ever worked a job and you joined a cooperative, you see that when you all contributed money, it was your turn to take. You were able to buy your car. Cooperative will say, pay back with little interest. That's the concept of Ubuntu. And everybody in the thrift society became better off. They all owned cars. They all built houses. Now imagine you aggregate it. We are all better off. That's what the US did. They joined all the states. They bought Louisiana, bought Texas, bought California, the United States of America. We share destiny. If you don't have cotton in Utah, you have cotton in North Carolina. If you don't have salt in North Carolina, you have salt in Utah. It's the same country. So.
Thank you, Dr. Lawani. And the next question is going to come from Bernard Fagba. So please, let's make our questions snappy because we have just about 12 more minutes to complete this particular portion of our program.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Shea. Thank you, Dr. Wee. Mine is just a little contribution. I think most times we forget that we have our own culture. I give a very good example. Most times, in fact, what I did throughout last year was going to the office. 1 week I dressed with my traditional wear. The other week I put on shirt and trouser, and I must commend Dr. Philip. I know he has not observed this, but most of the times that we have lectures like this, he's always either his cap or something will just represent his tribe, and I commend him for that. So I think, as Dr. Wee has said, we need, yes, always to think of gradually getting our own culture back in place. I know in NTA sometime, and I think they still do it, they wear their traditional wears for newscasting. And that's one way or the other, when a white man sees that, he knows that, okay, yeah, this is from Nigeria. So we need to localize most of our dealings, even with foreigners. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. So while we wait for anyone who may have questions again, I just want to quickly chip in my point here and a question for everyone. So I know there is a recurrent talk about decolonization and all that, and how all of this affects development in Africa, and boiling down to a factor of socioeconomic opportunities being available to everyone. And definitely all of this affects all of the aspects of our lives, the political life, the social life, and all that. So my concern here is that, like Dr. Uyi mentioned, that we should avoid past wrongs. We should work on decolonizing. and we should work towards integration, continental integration, regional integration, and all of those activities that could be taking place here and there on the African continent. So when we say of how African countries in the current dispensation continue to run to China for economic succor. So personally, I want to tally this with African countries making the same mistakes that were made in the past that seem to have crippled us for so long. And in the context of looking at how transitional justice and socioeconomic opportunities intermingle, I want to see that even in talking about the model of development, is the kind of economic support that African countries are receiving from China opportunity opening for rural Africans. For example, you have airports, you have all of these big structures everywhere. There is no electricity in most of rural Africa. There are no hospitals, there is no access to medical care and all that. So, and how much of involvement is China in political? How much of involvement is China in human rights issues? It seems to me that China is never interested in that. So that's my question and my point. Thank you.
I think Dr. Phil also has his hand up. So let's combine that.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Lawani. I think I should start on the note of Dr. Ajayi's intervention. That China simply has the principle of non-interference and understanding, whether this is right or not. But I agree with you that we must avoid, the mistakes of the past. For me, I don't think the engagement with China is as much a problem as the terms of engagement that are. So I think it's different. We have to engage within the global economy, but the terms of this engagement are things that we really need to evaluate. Now to my question. I know that the US is very big on reparations movement. So, from the 60s, they were talking about how do you compensate for slavery? How do you compensate, the different injustices against, racial injustices, perhaps gender injustice as well. And so there are two strands that I've noticed within the trends of argument. There are those who prefer to look at the past. So they talk about restitution, they talk about payments for wrongs and rights. And there are those that align with Dr. Uyi's emphasis on looking at the future, which is integration. So you provide an enabling socioeconomic environment for people to thrive and also to make up for the kind of disadvantages that they've had, talking about equity, within this framework. So I want to ask Professor Lawani, what's your take on the way to go when it comes to reparation, especially for those of us on the continent of Africa? You're not like slave descendants, but we know we have lots of people that may have contributed to our own economy. Yeah. So do we start asking for payment to say, can we calculate how many persons were even taken out of this continent? Or do we look for terms to engage? I know of recent, they've been talking about return of artifacts. And they'll be big on that. Germany will return today, Britain is returning tomorrow, and you still have lots in their museums. But my question is, within this aspect of return, which could be termed as restitution, what is the value that will attach to these artifacts? How much will this bronze and whatever they are returning cost or contribute to our development and economy at this point? Or do we engage in terms that could really help to develop our economy? Thank you very much for you giving me the class.
All right, thank you. Dr. Jai, can I take these questions now? Should I go with? Okay, all right. So first on the question of running to China, let me kind of just from the point of my experience and research in development economics and international trade. Now, first of all, when you want to understand the way a colonizer operates, you have to remove the toga of victimhood. You have to come from a neutral point. Otherwise, you'll be blindsided. The colonizer never ever gives you the impression that they want to oppress you. No, they don't. I mean, it is antithetical. So when we're fighting them, I've seen people write commentary and make observations as if the colonizer is consciously pushing down their motive or their intention to colonize. They don't. Colonizers have to be subtle. Matter of fact, many of the agents that the colonizers use do not even know that they are agents in a colonizing process. So you say, oh, I'm going to commission you, I want you to go and find what's all the way they call this river Niger. Just go. Actually, they don't even have a name for it. You go and find it, maybe name the river. And then Mungo Park sets out, with the authority of His Royal Majesty or Her Majesty, and he's doing this, and then he says, oh yeah. You know what? They are what do they call them? They are heathen people, they don't know there is a God. Let's go with these Bibles and let's go and teach them. Or in the case of the colonizers from the Middle East, we are educated in the ways of Allah. You people don't even know you don't know how to dress yourself up. You don't know how to treat your woman. You don't know what to do with children. We're going to bring this education to you. And you don't know it. I'm telling you, the Sultan of Sokoto does not know he's an agent of colonization. Has no idea. As far as they are concerned, they are perpetrating a tradition and a culture that has made millions of their people better off. But the caliphate is not a caliphate, first of all, because you are aggregating people together for a common cause. It's a caliphate, first of all, because of a religious agenda. That is colonization. The same way the missionaries did coming through the seas. There's no difference. And so today, we're having conversations in our politics about a Muslim ticket or a Muslim Christian ticket. None of those religions are indigenous to our people. Not one of them. And it is hard to explain to someone whose name is Abubakar Muhammad that is not an African name. This is what the colonizer does. It's the same thing with China. Now, the economic context for China is slightly different in that China came into the space in the presence of developed countries. So the developed countries had this way all the way from when we were colonized, from the 17th, 18th, okay, first it was trade up until the 19th century, then the colonization started properly. All of that. So those guys were there, the Dutch, the Germans, the British, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, were there. Then the US, in the case of Liberia. Now, China came when these people were already present. They had left. So they did a lot of work. And because they struggled through those odds, because they became a global power in the presence or in the era of information where people could verify stuff, they had some kind of credibility. It's hard to toga China as an imperialist nation because they're an example of an anti-imperialist movement. They fought the imperialists in their own countries. And they'll be the first to tell you that we are not interested in whatever, like Dr. Phil said, no, we don't have it. Whatever you do with yourself is because they have plenty of baggage in that regard. And because it really doesn't advance their own interest. If the African continent wasn't available for China to come to, the economy would have gone, it's a bit difficult to explain. Let me give you in simple economics and finance terms. China generated so much money, not wealth now. They had so much money from their transactions with counterparts around the world that they couldn't repatriate it back to China. Ask the Chinese central bank governor, don't quote me. Go to, if you have access to the Politburo, send an email to Xi Jinping and say, did you move to Africa to make investments because you had no place to put the money in China? If he tells you no, he's lying. If they had repatriated that money to China, there will be runaway inflation and the economy will just go kaput. It's the same problem with the Western world. The Western world had the same problem, except in their own case, multiple recessions had a way of bringing them back to earth and stabilizing their growth. China couldn't take the money back to their country. And so they had to find avenues. So they invested, they bought almost all the real estate on the west coast of the US. They just put the money out there. And they still have money here. They can't. The economy is not just large enough to take back all the money that they got in their positive trade balances by reason of their economic growth. But the lesson for us to learn from China is not so much what they are even doing now. It's how were they able to figure out what they did. And I'm telling you, it was decolonization and integration. They had to remove the vestige of every experience of the colonial masters. In this case, the Japanese, the British, they had to take it off. And that's what Chairman Mao called a cultural revolution. And they were making things, but we were laughing at them. We say, why can't you go and buy made in China when you can buy made in Spain? Why can't you go and buy made in China shoe? We're actually laughing at them. We thought the products coming out of their country was inferior except the more they did it, the more they became proficient, the more they gained comparative advantages for labor, comparative advantages for asset, comparative advantages for capital. And now they've developed advantages in entrepreneurship because they actually are able to develop new technology and new knowledge by themselves now, to the extent that they were the first country to actually identify the strain of this last pandemic we had. People blame them for it, but they had the technology to identify it. So that's what we should learn from China. So look, folks, if anybody comes to you and say they want to help you with money, don't tell them. Why would you tell them no? You have to have the knowledge and the repertoire to know that here is the gap I'm going to fill with this help. And like Philip said, to negotiate the terms of that help. Like we say in my place, when a handshake goes from the wrist to the elbow, it's not a handshake anymore. So keep the handshake at the wrist level. Let them not hold your elbows. And if they still want to do the transaction, let them come. That's one. And we must go into that the conversations with China or with any other country as equal counterparts, with no difference or differential in the knowledge level or in the information level or in the capacity to discuss ideas. They don't have any ideas. But Sheyi works in Howard. I work here in Marshall. Went to school. Here, there's no difference in the capacity to reason or to have ideas, especially in today with access to information. So there's no holy grail coming from Mpoje Wiala because she's the director of WTO. She doesn't know any more than I know. So she has meetings with people in her area. I have with mine. This is what I know. This is what you know. Let's negotiate. And we have to go into those conversations knowing that you have to declutter the colonialism from your mind. And you can engage in the conversation. Okay, China, you want to come build it? Why? No, I don't need the airport in this place. You keep your money. Or okay, you want to build, I want my people to build it. Why? I have the engineers. If you don't go build it in Taiwan, I don't need your engineers to build airports for me. The airports you build, I can't maintain because I don't have the knowledge that you used to build it. Let me build it, my engineers, then I can maintain it. Folks, if you build a road, if you don't build a road by your knowledge, how are you going to maintain the road? And that's why we don't have our infrastructure is broken because we didn't build them. How are you going to maintain a hospital you didn't build? How are you going to maintain an airport that you didn't build? How are you going to maintain a car you didn't build? When the valve gets broken, you don't have the part because you didn't build it. When the rim is torn apart, you don't have the part because you didn't make it. When the engine block destroys, you don't have the part because you didn't make it. And we have engineers who can build blocks of engine, build transmission. Just let them. Why are you in a hurry to build like the Americans? You go to Cuba, they have cars, no import. They have hospitals built by themselves. They export healthcare because they indigenized the knowledge. They decluttered colonialism and they built by themselves. The same thing in China. So that's it. To engage the Chinese, let them know that we're not, it's even an insult How can one country be having a summit with a continent? China-African summit, US-African summit. The US is one country, and the entire African continent is negotiating with one country? That's an insult already by itself. And I live here. It's not something we'll say. It's not before they start asking me to check my naturalization if I already swore an oath to the United States flag. But how can? The truth is, it's a problem of colonialism to always think that every product you have, every idea you have is inferior to that. Not in this age. Not anymore. They've helped us with the technology they've provided us to engage them from the point of view. I'm not talking about the covert things that they do, just the knowledge available to make things, to build an aircraft, to build a home, to make cars. We don't, how can we need, the reason Ajaokuta has not worked is because we brought foreigners to build it. You go get trained. The reason you get an education to solve your own problems, not just to earn a living. Go to school and be a doctor so you can get paid. No, go to school and be a doctor so you can cure people and improve the process of curing people. That's it. Engage the Chinese from the point of having equal counterpart knowledge. The places where we are deficient, we know. They are also deficient. They have blind spots just as we have. They're not any more educated. What they've done is to declutter their minds, grow at their own pace, not allowing any external influence make them feel inferior. And they develop themselves to where they are. This problem of superiority and inferiority complex is a colonizing problem. And they've integrated. China is a big, vast country. Integrated. We are scattered around. I mean, to fly from, George was saying, how can I to get a ticket from Nigeria to where? Okay, now there are direct flights to Cairo, but then just think to Central African Republic. I have to go to Paris before I come back to Bangui. And that's an insult. If the roads were integrated, there will be a bus service like I took from Paris all the way from Paris to Rouen to all the way to Brussels. And that's it. A bus system. My friend came to meet me in Berlin all the way from Wrocław in Poland. Different countries. This is the integration we're talking about. Channel your resources to integrate. Build roads by your hand, by yourself, with your technology between Nigeria. And don't bring foreign. If you don't build the road, you cannot maintain it. I'm not kidding. I have problems fixing things around because I didn't build it. I'm saying, oh, come and help me. The guy who built it was like, here's what's wrong. You owe me 600. I'm like, for what? Yeah, you couldn't fix it. How would you? Because you didn't know. The same way people come to my class, they don't know. You're going to pay me $50 for an hour of consulting. You'll pay me $200. All you did is just send me 2 pages. You didn't know. So on the issue of China and human rights, I agree with Dr. Phil. The Chinese have kind of taken a position. They have no choice because they have been they position themselves not necessarily as anti, but as a corollary or a parallel power in terms of ideology, culture, everything with the West. So if the West is hammering on human rights, they just ignore it and face there. So they do no harm, they cause no harm, they do no harm, they don't fix no harm. They leave you to deal with all of those issues as they did with theirs. They actually did. They have found cultural ways to address the oppression that they faced as a people. And they're still doing that. Now we know that recently the riots in Hong Kong have kind of thrown around a different perspective on that. But we are still watching out to see how far they go with that, with the issue of Hong Kong. Okay, so then on reparation, yes, reparation is a strong negotiating tool. And, oh Lord, what is it? Okay, so I was going to recommend that you go and read Frantz Fanon. It's right there on my The Wretched of the Earth. When you read, you begin to see why you're not asking for reparation because you are helpless. Or actually, you ask for reparation from a position of strength. That look, let's talk. Our future and our destiny has tied. For you to live your life here, to keep your standard of living, you need me. Having these things I have. And if you think that you don't owe me these, then you can go. I'm just going to cut off and create another channel. Actually, the position of strength comes when you decolonize, integrate, and you start growing, they will come and meet you and say, look, we offer reparations. They will. They say, oh, no, imagine the day the entire French-speaking countries in Africa are able to mobilize, organize, integrate in the African continent, the kind of force they will present to the French. And whether French will not be telling them at that time that, oh, yeah, we understand. How can French commandos be on the African continent to protect African countries from African invaders? How can you be fighting elements from the Sahrawi, from the elements that have been infiltrated, from giving arms, foreign arms that we don't make? Foreign arms that we don't make. You have fueled this insurgency, pockets of people in the Saharan area fighting their own country, and the foreigner is coming to it. Can anybody guess why the Malians then told them to leave? These are the problems. So reparation is a strong tool, but you negotiate from a place of strength. And on the value of artifacts, yes, let them bring them back, even if they are worthless. If they were worthless, they will not be sitting on the shelves in their museums. Let them come. Let them pay for ticket. Let them come and buy our hotel, whatever, to look at those artifacts in our museums. And if we are not able to use them for anything of value, it doesn't matter. They belong to us. Why you want to teach me how to use my own thing? Give it to me. If I destroy it, it's mine. That's why the Afghans told the world, when I say, don't destroy these Buddhas, don't destroy these things. The Taliban say, they're in Afghanistan. That came from US, from Europe, be telling me the cultural, is it yours or mine? The Buddhas were built in Afghanistan. They were built on the hills in Kandahar. They were built in the hills in Fallujah. They were built in the hills in what's the place? Kabul. Now you are telling me I should not destroy them. They put the camera, put it on CNN, took the bulldozers and took down the Buddha. They belong to us. You cannot be dictating to me what to do with my artifacts. Matter of fact, you stole them. I should be the one putting you in jail for stealing my artifacts. You're a colonizer. Part of the decolonizing process is to tell them straight. Look, do not recommend, don't tell me. Because people were divided and stupid from way back and you were able to steal, does not mean you cannot dictate the terms of my own property to me. That's the thing. The artifacts may be valuable, may be worth millions. Give them to me. I made them. They belong to me. Sit on the shelf, pay the ticket and come and watch them here. Or if I choose to destroy them, it's mine, not yours. You will sue me for violation. If I went and took something, actually, and put me, if I took your, and that's what they do. You launder dollars, launder pounds, they arrest you. It's their money. They arrest you, but you laundered my artifacts. Now you want to give me the terms for which to give them back to me. So yes, run to China, let them bring the money if they have. We dictate the terms for which we use them. We rely more on ourselves than we rely on them. Opportunity for, I didn't quite dwell on that, on the rural, for the rural areas. So yes, that's what governments are supposed to be for. We all can't negotiate, is why we elect a government. Hopefully we elect people who are knowledgeable and sensible enough to be able to complete transactions on our behalf. So bringing the money to Africa is not the bad thing, it's the terms within which we accept them, and that we're operating from a point of equal knowledge, equal information, and that we can call their bluff and ask them to go if they don't agree with our terms. And yes, China has just chosen not to dabble into human rights like the West. They had to fight through their own way, and somehow they've succeeded in doing it. We also have to do the same. We don't need China speaking up about rights. We have to do the same. We have the consciousness as humans that we should protect those who are not quite as well off in our continent. And we should. Transitional justice, this is what we're talking about. We are not saying condone injustice or perpetrate it. So we recognize that. On reparation, I've said, yes, reparation is good. You negotiate from a position of strength. Matter of fact, when you get strong and they know that, they feel your impact, they come begging you. And then you say, well, you're owing me this, give me back, and then let's talk. They will, but it's on the table. It's a negotiation tool. You don't take it away. And on artifacts, like I said, give me back what belongs to me. It doesn't matter. Let me do with it what I want to do with it. You can't dictate to me what belongs to me. That's what the colonizer does. You're telling the child, you're not old enough to use this. No. I'm old enough. It's mine. Okay. So my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I overran the time. I just saw your note. I'm sorry. Forgive me.
It seems like we should have a further conversation. It's been very interesting, except that we have to round off this program because we have gone past the time. And there's always going to be more opportunities for us to continue to discuss these issues because they continue to be relevant to the lives of our people, the lives of the place we call home. And so it's on this note that I will. Oh, I was told that my audio is not clear, and I'm surprised.
No, you are good now. You are good.
Oh,
it's good.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. So it's on this note that I would like to thank Dr. Lawani for his impactful knowledge that he has dished out to everyone here. It's been an interesting intellectual exercise. And a special thanks to Dr. Philip Olayoko, who is the coordinator of the center. And a big thanks to everyone also. I see people here from different parts of the world. And some of us are old colleagues. And some we are meeting for the first time here. And definitely, this is my first time coming here too, and it's interesting. I actually work for a federal agency, so I had to quickly flex out for me to be able to attend this program. And I'll definitely try my best in the near future to be a part of it. It's always good once in a while to get into this. So, Dr. Layako, are you there? Oh, it's like his connection is not too good there. So it's on this note that I will call it a day here. And hopefully, if there is any message again from Dr. Layako, he would send that to us. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, everyone.